Chapter 20. "How many rooms are in the castle?" Kalo asked. Traylon glanced upward as the chairs twisted higher and higher through the trees. 9, not counting the foyer, he replied. "It starts in the foyer, moves to the dungeon, the huntress's forest, the rooftop garden, the attic, down to the ballroom, then the kitchen and library before entering the throne room." "What is the rooftop garden like?" Paul asked, trying to figure out which trap they were likely to encounter next. "It has all kinds of singing and dancing flowers and animals," Traylon said. "I think we should probably get out and walk through each section. It might be safer." "I'm up for safer," Fox said with a grin. Traylon nodded and drew out the miniature controller that he had with him. Once the chairs were level with the garden, he pressed a button to stop them and released the straps. He gripped the bar and carefully climbed out of the chair. "Be careful, I know some of these plants spit out water," he muttered to the others as they gathered around him. "What are we looking for?" Creon asked, glancing around. Traylon shrugged. "Your guess is as good as mine," he replied. "I would say anything that looks out of place." Creon looked around with a skeptical glance at the dancing and singing plants and animals. "And that helps how?" he muttered, before nodding toward the left. "I'll take this area." "I'll go with you, Creon," Mandra said. Slowly, the men split up in groups of 2 to search for any evidence that the younglings had been here. Creon and Mandra weaved in and out along the narrow paths between the animated figures. The music and songs of "This Must Be Halloween" and "Halloween All Year Long" played happily in the background. They were almost to the far side when the area above them suddenly turned dark and their hair stood on end. They glanced at each other and grimaced. "Thunderstorm," they both said, just as a swirling storm opened up into a torrential downpour. "Great," Creon muttered, wiping the water pouring down his face. "Just great." "These things look real," Vox muttered to his brother. Viper nodded. "We're lucky that the Valdier didn't find Kara before the war, or we might not have survived it," he joked. Vox turned to look at his brother with a serious expression. "You are happy with Tina, Viper? I know you and Pearl still have your moments, but I will be forever grateful to you for bringing my mate's family here." "Pearl is an unusual woman. I am just grateful she lives here instead of on our world," he chuckled. "It gives us an excuse to visit frequently." "True," Fox agreed. "What kind of plant is this? It looks very real." Viper felt his cat purr and struggled to move closer. "Do you smell that?" he whispered, closing his eyes. "Whatever it is, my cat is going nuts for it," Vox muttered, stepping closer. "It smells almost like Riley's milk." "Tina's too," Viper groaned, walking closer to the huge glowing purple flower. In a daze, both men reached out to touch the unusual plant. The moment their hands touched the glowing petal, their cats hissed a faint warning, but it was too late. Within seconds, both Vox and Viper were no longer standing in the narrow aisle. A pulsing light showed them locked inside the purple bloom that had closed in around them. Haven and Keelan paused at the fork in the path. One path led to a dancing fountain, the other through a dark tunnel of vines. Staring back and forth, they both moved in the direction of the dancing fountain as if by some unspoken agreement. "That was pretty innovative of Balent," Haven commented, as they walked along the winding path. "Mud shooters. I've never heard of those before." "Dulcie developed them so that we could play tag with Balent," Keelan replied. "Alice is very powerful, Haven. I was not aware that your kind could teleport." Haven glanced at Keelan and grimaced. "Not all of my kind can," he admitted. "I did not develop the ability until the last few years. Alice, she is much more powerful than Emma and I realized." Keelan paused and placed a reassuring hand on Haven's shoulder. "You will help guide her," Keelan said quietly. She is a beautiful and talented little girl. Haven's lips curved into a rueful smile. She is also very strong-willed, like her mother, he acknowledged. Emma? She reminds me of the delicate petals of a flower, Keelan stated in disbelief, lifting his hand to touch one of the odd-shaped petals next to him, before he realized what it was. Run! What? Haven said, startled by the change in Keelan's voice. Dragonfire! Keelan choked out, grabbing Haven's arm and pulling him forward just as a burst of flames exploded from the flower next to him. Dragonfire? Haven muttered, turning to see that the flowers were now turning a bright red. The flowers are called dragonfire, Keelan yelled, sprinting forward toward the fountain. Touch them and they shoot fire. Why do you have fire-shooting plants? Haven shouted back, ducking and swerving when several more bursts of flame shot out. Ask my brother's mate, Keelan hollered, just before he dove into the fountain. Why should I be surprised? Haven muttered, a moment before he jumped over the side of the fountain and submerged beneath the crystal-clear water. Cree turned in a circle, glancing cautiously around him. He and Kalo were almost finished with their section of the garden. Except for a handful of annoying singing plants and fake animals, they hadn't discovered anything. He crossed over the path to the one Kalo had just walked down. His gaze swept the area, looking for any type of trap. Have you found anything? Cree asked, when he saw Kalo standing next to a huge open flower. No, not yet, Kalo said, staring at the unusual egg-shaped structure. What do you think this is? If you don't know, don't touch, Cree ordered. It looks like some type of bird's nest, Kalo muttered, bending down to look inside it. He jumped back when a beautiful small furry creature peeked at him. Cree, there's something inside it. Kalo, I said, Cree started to say before his voice faded. That looks real. Maybe Mandra would know what it is, Kalo said, reaching out when the small creature rose up on its back legs and pawed the air. I've never seen anything like it. Cree moved uneasily from one foot to the other. Well, either leave it or grab it and bring it back with us to see if Mandra or Keelan recognize what it is. Whatever you do, we need to go. Melina could be back any minute, and we still have to get back to Hope, he reminded his brother. Oh, right, Kalo said. I'll bring it. I don't think there is any food for it in here. Kalo gently picked up the creature and tucked it back inside the egg-shaped mud and stick nest. Picking up the nest, he tucked it under his arm and turned back the way they had come. He ignored Cree's look of amusement. Who knows, maybe Melina would like it, Kalo said defensively. It's cute. Cree shook his head. Sometimes I wonder about you, Kalo, he chuckled. It would get lost among all of her teddy bears. Paul stopped to stare at the glowing purple flower that was shaking crazily. Inside of it, he could hear the muted shouts and see the shadowy outlines of two men. Vox and Viper, if he had to guess. They had been drawn to the sweet scent of the mother's milk. Fortunately for him, his mate had quickly taught him which plants to be careful of and which to avoid. Shaking his head in amusement, he walked forward and studied the plant. It would take months for the plant to digest the two men. He placed his hands on his hips and watched. It was obvious the two men were arguing with each other. Yep, greenhorns in a blizzard, he muttered, dropping his hands to his side and striding forward. It took him a couple of minutes to find the small yellow tentacle. It was a natural release for the plant. Wrapping his hand around it, he pulled on it hard and jumped back. Within seconds, the bloom opened up, spit the two men out, before closing up in a tight bud in defense against the predator that had attacked it. Vox and Viper slid several feet across the floor thanks to the coating of slime from inside the plant. Both men groaned and wiped at the liquid running down their faces before glancing up to stare at Paul with a mixture of exasperation and relief. What is that thing? Viper finally asked, climbing to his feet. Mother's milk, Paul chuckled. It can be a very unpleasant way to die. It takes months for it to digest its prey. Vox spit out some of the slime and wiped a hand across his mouth, only to grimace when he spread more across his lips. He pushed up off the floor, slipping for a moment before he regained his footing. Once steady, he ran his hands through his hair in disgust. "I've changed my mind, Viper," Vox snapped, slinging the gooey residue off his hands. "I don't like the smell of that plant anymore." Paul chuckled and shook his head. "Come on," he said. "I don't think the kids booby-trapped this level." "They didn't need to. Kara had already done it," Viper muttered, shooting one last look at the innocent-looking bloom that was beginning to open up again. "What happened to all of you?" Traylon asked, straightening up from where he and Zoran were talking after returning to the chairs. "You smell very sweet," he added, with a wrinkle of his nose. "That's what happens when you get eaten by a plant," Vox growled, walking funny as the slime ran down the inside of his pants. "This stuff better not cause problems with my cock, or I swear there'll be another war." Zoran and Traylon chuckled. "We'll ask Dola the next time we see her," Zoran promised. They all turned as Creon, Mandra, Haven, and Keelan walked up. All 4 men were drenched to the skin. Traylon sniffed. It smelled like they might have been a little singed as well. "Did you guys go swimming?" he asked in surprise. "Thunderstorm," Creon and Mandra muttered, walking by the men and climbing onto the ride. "Dragon fires," Keelan glared. "Please tell me why you have real dragon fires in the garden, Traylon," he demanded, before he stopped and stared in surprise at Vox and Viper. He sneezed when the sweet scent swept over him. "Mother's milk? You've got mother's milk as well? This is a family attraction. You don't put plants that can catch you on fire or eat you in a family attraction," he added, in an incredulous tone. "I didn't. Kara and her crew did. Besides, no one is supposed to be out of their seats," Traylon said defensively. "Hey, look what we found," Kalo said, before he stopped to stare at the other men. "What happened to you guys?" "Where did you get that?" Mandra asked in a hoarse voice, his gaze locked on the mud and stick egg in Kalo's hands. "What, this?" Kalo asked, holding it up. "We found it sitting on a flower. It has the cutest little furry creature inside." "I know what it has inside," Mandra replied, stepping back and raising a defensive hand when Kalo took a step forward. "I thought I had hidden all of them." "Why would you hide it?" Kalo asked, staring in confusion between Mandra and the egg-shaped item he was holding. Mandra opened his mouth to reply when he heard the familiar sound of a hum and some clicks mixed in with the sounds of music. A shudder ran through him as vivid memories of uncontrollable laughter swept through his mind. "Get the ride going, Traylon," Mandra demanded in an urgent voice. "Now! Kalo, throw that thing as far as you can. Move it! Move it!" The desperation in Mandra's voice was enough to energize the men into action. Kalo pulled back his arm and threw the suddenly buzzing nest as far as he could, while the men scrambled onto the ride. Traylon pressed the button, urging the ride to move faster even while the straps engaged around him. "Mandra, what is in that thing?" Haven asked grimly, noticing a dark cloud starting to appear from the nest. "Tickle bugs," Mandra replied. "Those things are pure torturous death by tickling."